Hello. It is Wednesday evening in a delayed Writing Wednesday. I'm Janet Fitch, and I normally do this at noon on Wednesday, but I had a birthday getaway, so I just got back. And Writing Wednesday is when I take writer questions over the internet or here in comments and see if I can answer your questions for you. My question today is from David Stafford. So I don't know if David got a hold of my change of time in time. But these Writing Wednesdays are always here on my Facebook page, and I've started putting them also on my new YouTube channel, Janet Fitch's Writing Wednesday, just because people sometimes find it easier to locate things on YouTube, and also due to ongoing hijinks by Facebook. It's always good to be prepared to exit Facebook. So it's also on YouTube if you're looking for it. And today's question is a character question. David writes, thank you for Writing Wednesday and for posting on YouTube. He wrote to me through my website, and you can always contact me through my website, and I can create a Writing Wednesday to answer your question. I am a 67-year-old retired submariner who reads a lot, writes a bit, poetry, stories. I've recently started longer work, and thank you for sharing your experience, Writing Wednesdays. I've noticed that in the longer work, the characters have more freedom to do as they please. Oh, yes, they do. So much so that I'm beginning to wonder whose story is this? Is the protagonist who I thought originally, or has a secondary character stolen the spotlight? Well, that's a really good question, huh? Any thoughts on the subject would be most appreciated. I am not a plotter. Okay, well, this is a wonderful question, something that does happen to people in a longer work. What do you do when you've begun with one character and another character emerges who is much more interesting, much more, has more personality, has more of a voice? Often the new character might be an antagonist. Often the antagonist is a stronger character than the protagonist. So if the relationship between this character and your protagonist seems to be someone who is making trouble for your protagonist, you might consider that that's all in the plan. That's a good thing, because your antagonist will always be a little stronger, if not a lot stronger, than your protagonist. So if you have somebody who is flashy and out there and has a very strong voice and seems to be taking over, often you're going to be seeing an antagonist. And that sometimes you'll need, with a character like that in the book, you'll often need a protagonist who we can follow, and we see this character through their eyes. So, for instance, I had a short story once with a very strong protagonist, very funny, really kind of cruel and difficult person, very strong personality, and people couldn't stand her. asked me to give her a coworker, somebody that, a friend, somebody we can see her through their eyes. And so I gave her a daughter. And then, and White Oleander grew out of that. So that's a case in which the strong character is not necessarily a good protagonist. A good protagonist is somebody who the reader will align themselves with, who will carry our sympathy, who we can imagine ourselves in their shoes. If you have a character who is very strong and somewhat unlikable, somebody who you're going to watch because they're going to do crazy stuff, but not necessarily the person that you're going to want to be, you keep that character in it, but you don't necessarily have to make them the protagonist. But sometimes if a character comes through and they are clearly much more interesting, have bigger problems, have, it's like you just got off the carousel and suddenly you're hooking into, a big ride at Magic Mountain. It's like, oh no, this should be the protagonist. Now, what's the difference between a secondary character and the protagonist? Protagonist is a very specific kind of character. And the most important thing about, generally speaking, as in all advice about writing, people can point to many, many cases where there's an exception. This is, what about such and such a book? What about such and such a book? So when I make a suggestion or a piece of advice, it doesn't mean this is handed down on Sinai and stone tablets. This is something to keep in mind. And if you feel like very strongly like you want to do something else, it's just something to know generally. And in this case, a protagonist is a very specific kind of character, and a protagonist is someone who changes. That the journey of the novel is usually a journey of change and realization on the part of the protagonist. And if you have a character who is extremely flamboyant, and these characters are generally resistant to change. They don't change. Antagonists do not change. They cause other people to change around them, but they tend not to be the protagonist of a book. So I would, thanks Valerie, I'm late, but I'm not giving up on Writing Wednesdays. When it's time, right? So whose story is this? Is indeed David got that part right. That's the thing to ask yourself, is whose story is it? You will know when you've written through the story. Whoever changes, that's whose story it is. Whoever ends up with the ending, resonant ending. Only the protagonist can make a resonant ending. Often you'll have a book like a multi-character book, like most of James Ellroy's books have multiple protagonists. And then as the book goes along, one by one, they drop away. Their piece of the story gets solved, or they get shot, or whatever happens to them. They drop away. And then the cheese stands alone. Whoever's left is the protagonist and has the big final scenes. So whoever's problem is being worked out is the protagonist. And that's how you know whose story it is. So having a very lively character, as is happening in David's book, does not necessarily mean that's a good protagonist. It just means you have a vivid character, and often secondary characters are more vivid than your protagonist. They're your Your protagonist is primarily your camera looking at everybody else and things that are coming towards them. And an antagonist or strong secondary characters it doesn't mean they're taking over the book, because think of the book itself. The structure of the book is like the steel underneath the stucco and all that. I saw Disney Hall being constructed when it was being constructed, and the structure underneath it just looked like a pile of I-beams. It was all in crazy directions, and I think it's more interesting than the finished building. I could have looked at that thing forever. But, when we talk about what makes the actual machine of the book, when we're talking about structure, what makes it work is the protagonist, and this protagonist slugging their way through their problem to get to whatever the ending is. So if you think of these beautiful birds of passage, the people that they interact with, the scenes they interact with, you have somebody who's really strong who threatens to carry the book away. Just ask yourself, the question is, whose story is it? Who's making the changes? Even on a scene level, what's a scene? A scene is one time, one place, one character, and something happens where the character cannot go back to the way it was before. Now, if you have a character who is extremely interesting and in peril, or fighting their way through something, that's a possible protagonist. But if you just have a character who is voluble and interesting, that's not necessarily a protagonist. That's not necessarily going to be a structural element of your book. So in asking yourself whose story is it, if you hang on to that, look who the scenes are about. How, in what way does the character seem to be taking over? Does say character B, the flashy one, the one that seems to be who have stolen the spotlight, do they have a problem of their own that they're working out? Or are they simply just riveting and hilarious? Because if they have their own objective and you find that more interesting than your initial character's problem, what they're fighting their way through, then think about that. Think about where you're going with that. Often you'll follow that second character, the really flamboyant one, and they'll be taking over, and then after a time they just stop moving. It's only their relationship with the protagonist that makes the little engine run. So play with them, see for a couple of scenes. You might take it from their point of view and what their objective is. Are they interacting with the protagonist, or are they pursuing a completely different story? That if they are, then you have to decide, what story am I more interested in? But then if you take them a while and you start getting bored with them, then you can tell that no, it was the first protagonist was the correct one. But we don't always start with the protagonist. Certainly with White Oleander, I started with the antagonist, thinking that she was going to be my point of view character. And nobody wanted her to be their point of view character. Everybody was like, give us somebody we can we want to be in this. But also, she wouldn't have changed. It would have been awful if you take a character like that whose their main trait is they are unapologetic and unregenerate. You know, they just, their unchangeability is the whole point. That is not a good protagonist. And there are counterexamples. So, this is not a hard and fast rule, but somebody is asking me for my opinion about this. Generally speaking, you're looking for the person who is in some peril. You're looking for a person who isn't quite sure of themselves, that somebody has a problem that they need to battle their way through, and are able to change, able to see what their problem is, what their weakness is. An antagonist just does not see their weakness, blames everybody else, in the case of Ingrid, just blames everybody else. Everybody is an idiot but me. And those people don't change. But being their kid, you see them huge. You deal with them, you have them in your book, but you don't necessarily let them run the show. In some cases, it's a more interesting voice, a voice that isn't as heard as often. When I wrote Paint It Black, I had 3 point of view characters. Michael, Meredith, the mother, and Josie, my eventual protagonist, all had points of view. So who would be the protagonist? In the end, the story belonged to Josie. When the question was, whose story is it? The story belonged to Josie because she was the one who changed as she went through the story. The mother changed to a certain degree, but she was so far down her own road, there was really no turning around for her. And the boy, Michael, was suicide. So there was no room for change in his character. So it was pretty obvious it was going to be Josie. And then her voice was not one that I had seen as much in literature. She was the high school dropout who was natively quite intelligent and asking interesting questions of existence. And in a very difficult situation. But the voice was was fresher than the suicidal intellectual or the mother, the narcissistic mother. It's just, narcissists are not really good protagonists. Although look at Hubbard. I mean, there's always counter examples, but in general, your protagonist is somebody who's capable of change. So anything I can add about this or any other issue you have? Whose story is it is always a good one to keep asking yourself, and making sure that each scene has movement, that in that person's story, that each scene, they can't go back to the way it was before. They can't just slam the door, get in their truck, and move back into square 2 again. They have to, something has to happen in their lives that makes the story move forward. They learn something, they see something, they go through something. And there's a change of mood because something has happened. It's a way to check for it. So what can I tell? What else? I'm answering all writing questions tonight. I should say I am teaching another weekend workshop through the community of writers. the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of December, and my last day for the early bird. There's an early bird discount until the 15th of November, so you have 4 more days. If you want to sign up, look at communityofwriters.org. There's a squib about the class and what that's going to look like. And it'll go to full price after the 15th of November. So check that out. So we do have some questions. Elaine says, when you have a braided narrative, would the protagonist have more pages? Now, braided narrative is when there, say, are 3 stories going on, and 3 protagonists or 3 point of view characters, and each section has its own sort of protagonist, so a different voice. So say the first is Michael. So Michael speaks. Things happen to Michael. Michael discovers, something going on at the bank. Blah, 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 blah. Then you run out of whatever you wanted to say about Michael for the time being, and you move to another character. So you allow Michael's well to fill up again, and you go to, say, June. And then what's going on with June from June's point of view, and you go on with her until you kind of run out of the chunk of emotion or material that you wanted to get to with her. You're kind of done with that, and then you can move on to, say, Chris, and do Chris, and you do Chris for a while, and then you go back to Michael, and time will have moved on in Michael's timeline, and you can continue his story, and then you move. So the question is, when you have a braided narrative, would the protagonist have more pages? Not necessarily. The protagonist is the one who ends up with the problem and ends up with the answer. So if you have a book like the Poisonwood Bible, which has 6 characters, 6 points of view, it's a tour de force, braided narrative. But as we finish the novel, one of the characters definitely comes forward as the protagonist, the person with the ultimate say. The ultimate problem is their problem to resolve. Not necessarily more pages, though. The same thing in an Elroy novel, or who else likes to do the multiple character, a braided novel? They start to have, they generally are, take their fraction. If there are 4 characters, it would be like 4 equal numbers of pages until they start resolving and peeling off, and you'll get your protagonist will have a few more pages, but that you'll see that more towards the end, not in the middle. And Deidre, hi. What do you think about characters who watch the action and report it? How does that fit with the camera aspect of the protagonist? Okay, so this is like a book like The Great Gatsby, where you have a young protagonist just watching what all these much more colorful characters are doing and changing his opinion about them as he's telling us. Because he is not the watcher type character starts to get smarter, is what happens in these kind of books. They catch on, the go-between. They catch on after a while and begin to have realizations about the world based on their newly matured or maturing point of view. So I think that's kind of the best way to look at the emerging consciousness of a more passive narrator. The narrator gradually comes into themselves and into their opinion about what is going on, and then that will resolve. What else? We have another question. Ruthie, hi. Oh, good. Ruthie's taking the dialogue workshop. The dialogue, that's the workshop that I'll be giving in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of December, is on dialogue on the page. Because so many of us are used to looking at movies, and we watch movies and we look at screenplays, and somehow we think dialogue is screenplay. We think dialogue is like a play. But these are visual forms where we can't know what's going on in the character's head. That's the biggest difference between a screenplay and a novel or a short story. Is in a novel or short story, we know what the character's thinking. So there's a layering between what they're saying and what they're thinking that is really interesting. And in a play or a film, the words on the page are just a blueprint for all a collaborative media where there's going to be a director, there's going to be actors, there's going to be set designers, there's going to be cameramen, director of photography, all of that. Music, there'll be a score. When you write fiction, you, the writer, are all of the supply all of that. So dialogue in fiction is going to be very different than dialogue for film. It's going to have all the other elements of fiction writing, and then people speak. And people speak in a way that's very different than what they do, at work, at school. You and your neighbors. You and your neighbors are like, hi, nice to see you. Nice to see you. How are the kids? On the page, you never ask a question you already know the reader already knows the answer to. There's no reason to do that. Dialogue on the page is a very specific thing. It's about conflict between characters. There's no conflict. You don't need anybody to say a word. The dialogue has to be interesting in and of itself. It has a certain rhythm. It has a certain compression. So all of these things I will be dealing with in my next weekend intensive at the communityofwriters.org if you're interested. So 4 more days until the early bird discount disappears. So here's Jeff. Hi, Jeff. How much outlining do you do ahead of starting a novel? Loose, detailed, and so on. No, I don't do any outlining ahead of time. Some people do. Some people outline the whole thing. People who tend to write genre fiction need to get it all into place before they start writing. If there are a lot of twists and turns and revelations and stuff like that, mystery especially, crime, they tend to be outliners. They also tend to be outliners because the speed at which they're required to work. An average mystery writer needs to turn out a book a year. So there isn't much time to go through and open all the closets and follow the cousin this way and follow the ex-girlfriend that way. They need to really have a clear picture so that they can, not get lost. So I am more open to getting lost because I crawl along on my stomach. People say that there's plotters and pantsers. I'm a pantser in the seat of the pants writer, but I have to say even more so I'm a pit of my stomach writer. It's like I can feel when something's not right. It kind of makes me slightly nauseous. And then when I'm hitting it, it's like, oh, the nausea goes away. So I am looking for, am I in the right direction? Is something happening? Am I excited about this? Did something happen in that last scene that can't go back to the way it was before? I'm making progress. I do more outlining after I have a draft or when I have close to a draft, so that then I see kind of what the hell was that all about, and I get a better picture of what I've written, and it helps me sculpt it. So the next draft, what I'm going to get rid of, what I'm going to bring up higher into consciousness. So that's how I do it. I put everything into a 3-hole punch binder, into a ring binder like you had as a kid. And I find some order to things. I notice nothing really happened with the neighbor, so out comes the neighbor. Nothing happened with that. I can put a piece of paper in with the letters TK, which means to come, meaning it needs something here. It needs like a bulk of something between these two scenes, and I don't even know what it is yet, but I feel it, so I can see there, and I'm going to write another chapter there. So I do it more that way, and it's kind of musical, like an opera, will have an aria, and then maybe, the whole chorus, and then there might be a quartet or a trio, duet, chorus, aria. And so I'm looking for that kind of variation, how many hands in a scene, how big, how small, interior, exterior. I'm looking for that kind of music as well. So I don't outline, because I'm not going to get that kind of thing with an outline. I might timeline. It's like, okay, how far am I in when this happens, and what's happening in parallel to that. When I wrote my Marina M. and Chimes of Lost Cathedral, I had to keep track of what was going on with my character, what was going on, the major events in the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution in Petersburg, and in the Civil War era, so that I could see kind of where my character would be in relation to that. I also had to keep track of what was happening in World War I, so what was happening in Europe. So I'm getting a better feeling of international politics, national politics, what was happening locally, and then what was happening in kind of the literary world at different times, as there were more pressures on the literary community vis-a-vis the Bolsheviks. And where did different writers in that period fall on the political scale, and when did we hear from them, and when didn't we? So a lot of timelines if you're working on something big, like, or even something smaller. I always think it's important to know what's going on in the world. Let's see what we have. Yeah, dialogue. Ruthie's saying dialogue for screenplay very different than writing for the page. Yeah. In writing for the page, you never want somebody to say stupid lines like, "What do you mean by that?" It's like, no, reader doesn't want to see that. They want to see something fresh, something they haven't seen before, ever. And you have to mint the dialogue right for that spot. So we're going to be going over all of the dialogue and talking about what makes for real dialogue that pops. And it's hard because I began writing, I hear the characters before I know anything else. I'll write a scene all in dialogue, not good dialogue. And then it's up to me to write it. That's just the way it comes out to begin with. I would never show that to anyone. It's just the way I hear it. And then I go back and I shape the whole thing and I sharpen that dialogue so that it really does something on the page. The reader laughs because it's so interesting, or somebody has just said something so great. That's what you want, is to be memorable. So Jeff says, pantsing is absolutely terrifying, but I get the intuitive part. Yeah, if you're going to not outline, if you're going to go along and see what happens. You just have to have antenna, like moth antenna, like all over your body, and you're feeling your way along. And anything that opens up a door, everything is going to start quivering. It's like, wow, a door. You're not going to just walk past an opportunity. You're going to see what's there. So you have to be very sensitive to what you've written and the implications of stuff that you are already writing. Here's Kathleen. She's saying, I'm doing this as my second novel taking place during LA Olympics. Yeah, so you have to know what's going on in LA. You have to know what's going on with the characters. The Olympics, things are going on in the world. Lots of stuff. So always that helps to definitely to have a keeping timelines. So Marina M was a great character, not always sympathetic. Yeah, my character Marina M is a poet and a great, she's one of those really enthusiastic people, and she's very young and romantic, and she's 17, 16, 17, 18, 19, and she's trying to live a life, and she has ideas, and these ideas are going to be, sometimes the character can be very maddening, but she's the one definitely growing through the experiences. They're really affecting her deeply. So definitely a protagonist. So yeah, you characters are not always going to be sympathetic. If you like them too much, it's like, not everybody's going to, it's like anybody else. If they're always nice, if they're always making the right decisions, it's like, where's the conflict? Where's the conflict going to be? I like a bad decision. I like a character who makes a bad decision from time to time. It gives you somewhere to go as a writer. If your character is a good person, always makes the right decisions, always supports the right person, always falls in love with the right person, it's like, where's the story going to come from that? That's a tough one. Oh, what else about these issues? Yeah, picking a good protagonist is something you should question. That David is right. You should question if something is alive in your work. It seems more alive than other things. Notice that. And he's noticing, okay, I have a character who's taking over. Just weigh where they're going to go, how far you can go with the character. Are they going to make changes? Do we care about them? Are we going to be them? Are we going to follow them? Are they going to, run out of gas? What else can I tell you about these? What else interests you about your writing? It doesn't have to be about protagonists. It can be about any problem you're having. I know it's National Novel Writing Month, which is why I put my weekend workshop in December. So people are going to have a lot of material that they're going to want to take another look at and see if they can refine. And dialogue is it's where you have to do everything. So it's the toughest kind of writing because you're integrating everything. You have to be able to wear the evening gown and the high heels and have the makeup well done and the hair well done and have something to say to the person that you're talking to with your wine. It's a very complicated process, this human interaction thing. And art is not life. Art has its own special magic, and you've got to make that magic as well as do something that looks realistic to the reader. What else can I? But yeah, one thing about a good protagonist is a good observer. A good protagonist notices things. Um, they don't have to be, a doctoral candidate in psychology. They don't have to be brilliant. Super educated. A very, uh, a person with a minimal education can still be a very observant person. Um, so it's more important that they are observant and awake mentally, that they will react to the things that happen. Um, the worst kind of protagonist is somebody who just doesn't notice things. So how is the reader going to notice anything if your protagonist doesn't? Um, because they still are your camera. Um, the protagonist is often the last person that you really understand because they are your camera. And sometimes it's like, yeah, but what are they thinking? What are they feeling? You have to remember to keep them alive, to turn the camera around sometimes, and find ways to tell us about them and their preferences and their opinions. And that's harder. The less mature the protagonist, the harder it is for to get an opinion. That's why personality is cumulative. And as people go through these experiences, especially the watcher type of protagonist, as they go through these experiences, they begin to have an interior life and their own opinions and their own, where they suddenly the person who, or gradually, say the person who dazzled them so much, in chapter 3, in chapter 30, it's like, oh, I'm starting to see, I've seen this before. I've seen this routine. I know how this ends. I don't like this, I thought this was very glamorous, in chapter 3, but in chapter 33, I've seen how this works, and I'm in a different place in my observational level. I'm seeing this through experience now. What about unreliable narrators? Deirdre asked, and also Elaine. What they observe is so telling, especially from an unreliable narrator. And Dedria says, I'm crazy enough without a shaky narrator. Yeah, the unreliable narrator is interesting. There can be the innocent unreliable. They just don't, like children who narrate, they just don't understand what they're seeing. There is the unreliable narrator who intentionally deceives. That's the great Nabokovian narrators. They're trying to seduce the reader. They know exactly what they're doing, and they present it in a way. Oh, I'm so sympathetic. You have to understand. I'm so funny. I'm so charming. Don't look at what I'm really doing. There are and there are unreliable narrators who are crazy. And they're very interesting, like Poe. You would call me mad? Would a madman have done this and this and this? It's like, yeah. The unreliable narrator like Mariah in Play It As It Lays. I would never do this. She gives you a list of all the things she would never do. And then she does every single one of them. It's like, oh, I can't trust her because she doesn't know herself. She thinks I will never, and then she does exactly what she says she'll never do. So she can't trust herself either. So Shona says, oh, good. I was happily chugging along with NaNoWriMo. That's the National Novel Writing Month that many people are doing in November. Chugging along with NaNoWriMo. Now I have a huge disruptive 4-day break. I'm worried I will not be able to jump back and pick up the thread. Well, that's the way normal writing is. You're charging ahead and then, my kid broke his leg, or, the relatives are coming in. And so it is important to learn how to jump back in, how to grab 15 minutes. So I would say you have 4 days ahead of you that, or you're in the middle of a disruptive 4 day break. See if you cannot completely break. While everybody's still sleeping, say you have relatives in town, while everybody's still sleeping, get up a little early and open the file and just clean it up a little bit. Just get in there and clean it up a little bit. Keep it alive. Maybe in the afternoon, Aunt Mildred wants to go to the mall, and say a house guest problem. Aunt Mildred wants to go to the mall, and it's like you've been to the mall like more than you need to in your whole life. You say, here's where you might want to go, and you might look at this shop, you might look at this shop, you make them a little map. Off they go. Your work is still alive because you checked in on it this morning. And while Aunt Mildred is out, don't use that time to do the laundry and wash the dishes. Use that time to get that file open and start moving ahead. So my tip is to try to find 15 minutes here and there, half an hour here and there throughout the day to go in and check in again, and try to keep it going. Even if you're just you're printing out, say, the last 20 pages and looking at it, and you're sitting there in the ER with your kid, and while you're sitting there, instead of checking your phone, you have pages and a pen, and you can go and be cleaning up the language. Just keep some pages with you to play with, and try to just get in, wedge in a half an hour, 45 minutes of here and there time, a 15-minute little clunk of time. You can get a lot done in those little 15-minute. It's more important to keep it alive than necessarily getting a big chunk of time. So I think you'll be able to do it, to keep that process going. I was away for a couple of days on vacation, but I took I took a chapter with me, and I took a look at it. I had an idea. I thought about it. I wrote a little bit about it in a I always keep my journal with me, so I wrote a little bit about it. I had some thoughts. I looked over those pages, and that's on vacation. So yeah, that's NaNoWriMo is about giving your writing practice it's like a slingshot. It gives you a little momentum, so that when the month is over, the momentum carries on. Dedria says, Stephen King says he writes every day. Yeah, I'm sure he does. You don't turn out pages like that. You don't turn out books the way he turns out books, by writing just when you're inspired to. I talked to the writer Robert Crais, Crais. He's a mystery writer, a really big-time mystery writer. He says, I go into my writing space and I work from 8 to 5. This is a job. I do it, So it's, you don't get productivity like that with a spotty attendance. You sit down and do it, and it's always with you. You have to feed it. You can't, it's like having a toddler. You can't just lock it up in a locker and come back in a couple of days and take him out of the locker. Writing is like that. It needs to be fed. It needs to be cared for. And the more you do it, the more responsive it will be. And the less days where you're sitting there avoiding it because, oh my God, it might be dead in the locker there. Uh-oh. But NaNoWriMo is really, it's really fun. People, ostensibly are writing a novel in a month. And I wrote my last post, I think, was about NaNoWriMo and what you can expect and what you can't expect from yourself. And I always think that use it as a slingshot, but nobody wrote a novel in a month. You'll write like you might write 8 good scenes, 6 good scenes, like fence posts that could be stretched out along the line of the novel. And then that's where you would attach more boards to make the fence, but you've put in the major scenes. That's a good way to use the time for NaNoWriMo. You might end up with something that a novel will take 2-3 years to write, at least. Because it gives you, a novel is something that the reader hopes has been considered in all its parts. The meaning of everything has been considered. What the heck? Where's the human emotion here? Where's the moral education that a novel is, as consciousness is developed and matured, as well as a story happening. It doesn't drop down until you've had a chance to really assimilate what you've created. So it's a start. A month of serious effort is a month of serious effort in the service of a book that you want to write. What you don't want to do is spend a month working like crazy, spewing out 50,000 words, creating a novel that then you throw in a drawer. Because it's not anything you really want to spend any more time on. Because there's not enough of you in what you've written that you want to continue it. It's a really good idea to just write some resonant scenes that pertain to that novel that you're writing. And if you want to give yourself a gold star saying, yeah, I wrote a novel, go ahead. But I'd like you to be able to use it when you're done with it. All right. Well, I want to wish you if you're doing the NaNoWriMo, wish you good luck with that. If you're writing your novel, wish you good luck with that. And if you're interested in getting the early bird discount on my class on the art of dialogue, it's at communityofwriters.org, and the early bird special ends on the 15th, which is on Monday. All right, well, have a good one. Thank you for coming. Okay, bye.